Welcome back to SecretSpool's Shadowy Sunday, where the most unsettling moments don't always come from creaking floors or flickering lights, but from the people we meet in places that we're supposed to feel safe. Sometimes it's a quiet stranger, a question asked at the wrong angle, or a look you can't quite shake. I'm Sylvia, and tonight's story begins in a peaceful suburban mall, the kind of place built to feel predictable and comforting, until one encounter in a bookstore cafe left a shadow that still hasn't faded. Suburban life moves on rails most days, gliding along the familiar track of grocery runs, coffee stops, and errand loops that never change much, and that predictability can feel like a warm blanket when the rest of life is noisy. That's what I was looking for that afternoon when I headed to my local open-air mall, a place I'd walked through so many times that I could have traced the storefronts from memory with my eyes closed. Inside the Barnes & Noble, tucked near the soft glow of the Starbucks counter, I slipped into one of those worn cushioned chairs with a lukewarm latte in one hand and a paperback in the other, a book I kept pretending I'd finish soon, even though life kept getting in the way. Around me, the bookstore breathed its usual gentle soundtrack, the faint hiss of steaming milk, the clink of cups, the whisper of pages turning, and the low, careful hum of conversations that never rose above a murmur. At first, I didn't notice her at all. She was just part of the background, a small woman sitting at a table about 10 feet away, a book open in front of her, dark hair pulled back in a simple tie, clothes plain enough to dissolve into the scenery. But the second or third time my eyes drifted past her, something snagged in my awareness, like catching a thread on the edge of a nail, and I had to look again without really knowing why. It took me a moment to realize what was bothering me. She looked like she was reading, but she wasn't really reading. Her fingers rested on the edges of the pages, but her eyes kept lifting from the print and darting around the store in sharp, anxious movements. She glanced toward the entrance, then the cafe counter, then the far shelves, over and over, like someone waiting for a person who was late, or hiding from someone who might suddenly appear. There was a tension in her shoulders that didn't match the peaceful hum of the store around us, a kind of internal tremor that you can't quite see but somehow feel, and it made my chest tighten in a way I couldn't explain. I tried to ignore it and return to my book, telling myself I was being dramatic, but that uneasy, buzzing awareness of her presence kept drifting back like a thought I couldn't quite push away. Then, without hesitation or build-up, she stood up. The motion was small but decisive, and she walked straight toward me with careful, measured steps that somehow still carried an edge of urgency. By the time she stopped at my table, that instinctive little alarm inside me was ringing, not loud enough to be fear, but strong enough that I knew I needed to pay attention. She asked if I was from the area, her voice soft and almost flat, but tinged with something I could only describe as fragile uncertainty. It wasn't the casual curiosity of a stranger asking for directions. It felt more like someone trying to confirm that the world still made sense, that people were where they were supposed to be. I said yes, I was local, and even as I answered, I found myself studying her expression, trying to read the worry etched into the small lines around her eyes. Before turning away, she asked if I had any book recommendations, and the words themselves were as ordinary as any you'd hear in a bookstore. But they landed strangely, like a line spoken, because she felt she had to say something rather than because she cared about the answer. I told her I didn't really have a recommendation, and she nodded a little too quickly, almost as if my response didn't matter, then walked back to her table and sat down, leaving behind a heavier quiet than before. I watched her more openly now, no longer pretending not to notice her. Back at her table, she didn't open the book or turn a page. She just tapped at the cover with thin, restless fingers, eyes sweeping across the store, again and again. There was a tightness to her movements, like she was barely holding herself together, and every time her gaze skimmed over the door or the window, my mind filled in possibilities I didn't want to consider. About 5 minutes later, she stood up again. This time, she carried the book with her, held close to her chest like it was something precious or fragile, or maybe like it was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. As she approached, there was a kind of determination in her step, the look of someone who had decided they were going to say something hard, even if it scared them. Without any lead-in, she asked how old I was. The question was abrupt enough to catch me off guard, but there was no challenge in her tone, just a weary sort of curiosity. I told her my age, and when I asked about hers, she answered, 29. But the way she said it made it sound less like a statement and more like something she'd had to rehearse, like she'd been asked that question so many times recently that the words no longer felt personal. Then she opened the book she was holding, but instead of printed chapters, I saw photographs taped to the pages. Faces looked up at me from slightly crooked rectangles, some clearer, some washed out from what looked like repeated photocopying. Different ages, different expressions, different lives, all suspended in the same strange stillness that comes with the word missing, even when no one actually says it out loud. She held the book out toward me, hands trembling just enough for me to notice, and asked if I'd seen any of them. Her voice changed on that question. It softened and cracked on the edges, carrying a kind of hope that didn't sound hopeful at all. It sounded exhausted, like she'd asked this question too many times and expected the answer to be no, but couldn't stop herself from asking anyway. I told her I hadn't seen any of those faces, and the way her shoulders fell was almost painful to watch, as if a small, fragile part of her that had dared to hope had been quietly turned off again. For a second, I saw something unguarded flicker in her eyes, grief, guilt, or maybe the deep loneliness of someone carrying too many questions and not enough answers, and it hit me harder than I expected. I tried to ask gently if one of the missing people was someone she knew, or if there was someone she was looking for, or if she was working with some kind of group, but each question seemed to push her further back into herself. Her answers were vague, trailing off halfway through, and she kept glancing down at the photos like she wanted to protect them from being discussed too openly, as if speaking about them too directly might break something inside her. When I finally stood up to leave, I felt torn in two directions. One part of me wanting to stay, to sit with her, to ask more, to find someone who could step in and really help her. The other part reminding me to keep a safe distance, to listen to the unease prickling along my spine, As I walked out of the store, I kept thinking about the way she clutched that book, the way her eyes moved like she was searching for someone who might never walk through those doors again, and it left a lingering ache I carried home with me. The next day, unable to let go of the weight of that encounter, I went back to the same Barnes & Noble, hoping I'd imagined the intensity of her distress and that I'd just caught her on an off moment. But when I stepped inside and saw her sitting in the exact same spot with the same book closed in front of her, her gaze distant and unfocused, it didn't feel eerie so much as heartbreakingly sad. Thank you for listening to tonight's Shadowy Sunday story. Some experiences haunt us not because they're filled with obvious danger, but because they reveal how many people are quietly carrying emotional storms we never see. Trust your instincts when something feels off, but let compassion shape how you respond. There are ways to alert staff or authorities or involve others without putting yourself at risk. Until next time, stay aware, stay safe, and take care of yourselves and the people who might be silently struggling right in front of you.